offer today, introduction to our classes. So in reality, this isn't going to be a really, really long class, and most of it's going to be interactive, and I'm expecting most of you all to help teach it. I'm just sitting up here sort of as a partial guide. The class is divided into two parts. We just want to really pass out some material and discuss what it means to be in Workers' World Party. That could take a long time, but we don't want to take too long, probably about 45 minutes just with questions and comments. And then the second part, and I'll introduce that part in about 2 seconds. The second part is really an interactive discussion on what is capitalism and why we're fighting for socialism. You can see some of this on the board. You all are going to fill this out when we get to the part. I asked Archie to sit up here because the two of us haven't had a chance to meet. But hopefully out of this discussion, we'll sort of have a flyer meme. I know a meme is not a flyer, but we'll call it a flyer meme where we can have some breakdown for people beyond just Workers' World Party so that people can quickly visually see the differences between capitalism and socialism and why we're fighting for that. It's not a big theoretical discussion. There's tons to read about Marxism. We won't exhaust it, but in the most simple forms, hopefully people go away with knowing some basics at least. And we have a more basic pamphlet for those who want to take it home and read it and that kind of stuff. But that's the second part. Both parts we're really going to try to each, and then the very last part of this agenda, we're going to discuss our next class and why we think it's so important. So anyhow, people have their whole packet. There's a couple things that I want to run through before we actually get down to. Oh, wait a second. Okay, Mohammed's. Oh, I apologize, Mohammed. So Mohammed's going to pass out the packets to everybody. It was the reading that was sent out through the email. While he passes it out, I'll just waste time talking. There was a little link on your email if you got the email. If you didn't, I can certainly give you the information, but there was a special pamphlet on, Lenin the Thinker, and it's a great short pamphlet, and I included it primarily because on April 22nd was Lenin's birthday. So I thought that might be appropriate for those who want to read it. It's a very short, popular pamphlet that was written by Vince Copeland, who was one of the founders of Workers' World Party. So people have that, but that has nothing to do with today's class because that's a whole other topic. April 22nd is that date. So does everybody have a copy of this? Cool. There are two things.
I don't know.
You don't, David? Okay.
No.
We don't have any more packets, but I have one document left.
I know what that is.
Okay,
I've seen that.
David, you can share. It's
Okay.
not, it's stuff, you're a member of the party, so you know some of this. The documents, just so that people know what they are, there's what does it mean to be a member of Workers' World Party and to become a candidate? It's like 2 pages, big print. And I'll try to go over that, but I just want to make sure people have that. There is, for those who always want to see the heavy version of everything, there is a letter that Lenin wrote to the Third Congress of the Comintern in 1921. The first couple pages of it are Xeroxed. I have, for those who really are into it, all these other pages to the letter he wrote. Lenin always wrote real long stuff. So all of it's included in your email, but what I did is basically yellow some of the segments that support the more simple form of what it means to be a member of Workers' World Party and become a candidate. And then there is this little booklet which you'll have. We're not going to discuss it today, but please take it. It's the 15 virtues of Fidel. It was written on his birthday. I personally, it's just near and dear to my heart because the Cuban Revolution is near and dear to my heart, but also because I think like ethics and principles, revolutionary socialism are like very, very important in our struggle. And we can read all the Marx we want, all the Lenin, all the this and that, and that's great and important, and we need to do that. But this piece kind of goes through some of the qualities that the Cuban Revolution possessed that the author thought were important for their victory, which include things like unity, telling the truth, stuff like that. So I thought it was really interesting that any people who are new to the revolutionary struggle or new members at least see this and be able to like kind of grasp that, you know, we're not just about talking, we're about walking the walk. In other words, how we treat each other, what we aspire to, whether we fall short of it or not, you know, whether it's about ending racism or bigotry against women and LGBTQ and other people, you know, that we're kind of serious about it. So, well, very serious, David. So anyway, people should look over that. The other part that I hope that people will see, because this is the introduction, is we developed a series of classes. And the classes about what the party's about, they're not always about learning Marxism, because there's a lot to study about Marxism. You could read Capital, you could read the Communist Manifesto, all those things are important to read. And we do have study groups and we do that. But what we wanted to do is put out to people what was unique about our party, or what was unique about our struggle, whether it's on the national question or the history of the LGBTQ movement and what we did during those early days. A lot of that we have to teach in class there and just some book that somebody read. So there's a whole lot of little stuff here, this page. The reason why I passed it out, not because we're going to go by this 10 classes in this order. Mainly what I was hoping is at some point, and you can do, please circle the first 3 things that are the most important to you. If you can order them like in 1, 2, 3, that's good. If you can't, that's okay. But you don't have to put your name on it either. But you can circle the things that you're most interested in. The reason why this is because while we have like figured out a couple classes, like Comrade Larry Holmes, who's the first secretary of Workers' World Party, will be like speaking on the 8th about the national question and the fight against racism. And then there's another class on global class war, which really talks about the history of Workers' World Party. And in other words, there's a couple things where we feel real proud. We've gotten some help from some of the members of New York City and national leaders of the party to come here and teach those classes. So they're already scheduled. But beyond that, what you all want to do is going to be like critical. So if you circle this, and we'll kind of look at it, not like a what do you call that, doodle, whatever you call it, that decides, but, you know, doodle.
Doodle?
Yeah, there you go. But we will kind of try to do the best we can to accommodate what people's desires and needs are. So if you see this thing that Muhammad passed out, it says, these are just a sample of some of the topics that we'll be covering in our classes. Just circle the first 3 that you most want to do. So that's those 2 documents. So actually, I kind of want to open the floor up for discussion, but I wanted to go through the real, what I call easy description of what it means to be a member. And then really, I would, you know, appreciate questions, not only myself, but other people, members who've passed, you know, been through the 6 months candidacy. And there's people who know a lot and people who know less. It doesn't matter. All the questions are important. So there's really, I think, 3 things that are the most of joining the party. And the first is to be active in building the party and the struggle. In other words, we're not an organization that's just looking for people who agree with the idea of socialism. That in itself wouldn't be enough. In the 60s, when I came up, it was called being an armchair radical. I don't know what the new terminology is for it. Maybe it's like Facebook radical or Twitter, whatever. In other words, you know, we want people who are doers and are active. I passed out this thing, which there's a highlighted part in yellow, and it's kind of the heavy part that Lenin talks about when they first formed the Bolshevik Party in what was Russia then and then the Soviet Union, now Russia again. But when that was formed, Lenin's party was very, very different from other organizations that existed. And there's a lot to be said about that. I'm not going into all what the structure of a party is, but I got this yellowed because the requirements are even, we don't want to scare people. They're not, this was a different period. When Lenin wrote this, it was what you would call pre-revolutionary period where things were different. And he also refers to things when some of the organization was underground. It isn't always everything here doesn't translate to everything now. But I distributed this to people and sent out the link via the Facebook page to show you that the party is in line with being a Leninist organization. We definitely, are looking for dedicated active revolutionaries who want to build a structure. 2 is agreement with the party's programs and our aims and positions. This doesn't mean that there can't be differences in the party. We have tons of differences. Sometimes we don't. Hopefully we don't argue enough that we wake up the next day and love each other. But the point really being is that the party is composed of key political components to our organization that are critical to us. And it doesn't do any good to join an organization that you don't agree with politically. That's the simplest way of breaking it down without making it sound real complicated. Like, in other words, we are for building revolutionary socialism. We take the oppression very, very seriously. And, we don't take that lightly. That's another key component. We support the socialist countries around the world. We're for self-determination of all the oppressed throughout. For some things, we've even put out some statements for socialist unity where we wanted socialist unity amongst all the groups, but we also made it very clear that we're not for the Democratic Party. We don't push that line. So anyhow, it's not like to join, you have to know every single little thing that we've ever stood for. But it's important to know the major things and an idea of what that is. And then the last 2 things really briefly is the party, we don't get any support from the Rockefellers, DuPonts, or any of the ruling class. So frankly, the only way we pay the rent in this office is that we contribute what we can each month in what we call pledges. We don't ask people for a certain percentage of income, and I'm going to tell you why we don't, because we believe that everybody has different abilities and needs, problems, etc. There are some people who may, and they have more money than people who have less, who may have a very, very low wage job or may be unemployed. There's also people that may make more money, but they got 2 or 3 kids to support. So in other words, you can see the world under capitalism is not an even place. So we can't put a percentage on how much you donate. We can't say everybody's got to give 5%. So it's really more, we have great trust in our members and our friends that people just do the best they can. And then the last thing is, what is candidacy? It's, to me, I think the word's a little too fancy, but it really just means a 6-month period where you get to know who the party is, you get to know more politically about what the party stands for and how we operate, and we get to work together in solidarity. I mean, we have yet, that I'm aware of, maybe there's some exceptions, I don't want to talk about any exceptions, but for the most part, usually people always join and we always embrace everybody. But it is a 6-month period, because there could be, somebody says they agree with us on everything and they come in and we find out, like, they're very arrogant, they still got a lot of white supremacy. I'm just using examples here. And, they say they agree with us on paper, but we have to take them aside and say, look, you're not meant for this organization. That doesn't happen. We haven't met anybody like that. So I don't want to say, but I'm just saying that's what the period of the 6 months is, so that, and also so that you get to know us. And you maybe get in there and say, oh, I really can't dedicate my life to this. It's just a little too much, or not, whatever. This is not my thing, and we'll still be your friend and we'll love you forever. But, okay. So anyhow, I'll shut up on that. I really want to hear people's questions, and what we'll do go from around the room. You don't have to, you can pass. I mean, this is not like Don is to my right. I mean, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. But, you know, I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to ask something or to say something or to make a comment or anything. It doesn't really matter. So, John, you're just because you sit next to him and I spilled junk all over you. And now you're like stuck with being the first. So if you have questions, comments, and we won't make this video public if you don't want it. And if you don't want to be on the video, make sure you let Rasica know.
This isn't gonna work too well. Maybe it will.
One thing that's on my mind is what's the decision-making process once you're a member towards like what's done, what the actions are, how they get done, and how's that decision-making process intersecting with Marxism values?
Good question.
We're just asking the questions.
We're just going down because otherwise I want to go back and forth.
I've sort of been working with the party for a little bit, so I've asked all my questions, but I'm wondering if you spill coffee on John 2 more times, can he skip the candidacy process?
That was my action.
See.
Yeah, that's all.
I don't have any questions.
Andre, any questions?
I could pass at this point in time,
Will you?
but well, you see, I wasn't expecting him to say I don't have a question, so I hadn't. any
Thought it
questions
was
in
done.
mind. I guess I'm anxious to continue to learn how to put socialism into action in our daily lives and political lives.
Okay. And remind me of your name because
Patricia.
Patricia, okay.
I was wondering what is the relationship with anarcho-communism and Workers' World Party. I am kind of new to being like anti-capitalist, but I first got really passionate about it based on like reading online like anarcho-communist stuff. So I'm really just anti-capitalist, but I wanted to know the relationship.
I've been feeling under the weather today, so I'm just gonna pass. I'm sorry.
There's no problem.
I'm going to pass too because I'm still sort of adjusting to be here. So.
No problem. It's okay.
We ask you your name.
I'm sorry, yeah, because I was late. I'm Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
Oh, hi, Jennifer.
Thank you.
I think
Nice to
I
meet everybody.
communicated with you a little bit.
Oh, did you want to ask me a question?
No. I just said I think Jennifer, I know you from email.
Sent some messages back.
Gotcha.
Emails.
I've been thinking about something, but I don't really know how to word it because I'm ignorant to communism, I guess. I've always heard of a lot of the leaders of communism being violent, and I think if there's like, I don't know, is there kind of like some line that you draw where you can just kind of like accept that like communism is cool and like agree with the tenets but not have to agree with the people that might I don't know if that makes sense.
Sierra?
I'm gonna pass. I feel like Andre and Josh. Jonathan, sorry. Kind of touched on the question that I had and really just about like action.
Right.
Yeah, my name's Leandra, and I'm kind of in the same boat, just like processing and figure out, what this action looks like.
No, let's just wait.
Do you have a question, Mr. Noodles?
Noodles is asking the next question.
He's spoken quite a bit. Just trying to say hi to Emily. You'll have to come back to us.
Okay, no problem.
He's too excited. Emily is here.
Archie, did you have a question?
I got nothing right now. I'm sorry.
Emily and, what's your name?
Rose?
Hi, Rose. How you doing? Listen, we just don't feel, you'll catch up. You'll catch up. Somebody will hand you the packet. We really, all we were doing very quickly is talking about what it means to be a member of Workers' World Party and what Candidacy is about. On that, don't worry. And what you don't catch up on, it's sort of being filmed. And there's a couple of people that are members and even people who are candidates who may be able to answer some of these questions. I wrote them down. I'm not, people can chime in on this stuff, but I did want to, pardon?
Did you continue? Did you say one, Archie?
No, I
Archie didn't. Archie
Oh.
passed. Archie
Oh,
passed.
but then
Did you have a
I've
question?
got one from our
Oh, okay.
our audience.
Sorry about
to our
that.
live stream.
Sorry about
The
that, David.
question is, what is the path to revolution? In other words, is it a vanguard party, armed resistance, a combination?
And who is the person asking the question? So it's
I
just
believe
good
that
to-
is Aaron.
Aaron.
If I'm
What is
wrong, I'll be
the path
embarrassed.
to revolution
Yes, it is Aaron.
and what is the rest of say the whole thing?
What is the path to revolution? In other words, is it a vanguard party, armed resistance, a combination?
Okay, that's a lot of questions and some of them pretty deep. So we all gonna have to answer
Absolutely.
them together.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to say, because concretely, some of the concrete questions I thought were important. Well, they're all important, but in different ways. John's question I consider very concrete in terms of locally, what do we do and what does the party do nationally in terms of what is our decision-making process. We believe in democratic centralism. And that's a big, big word. And how do you define it? It means different, it's implemented different ways in different organizations to a certain degree and in different countries and different parties. And that's what's interesting when you read this document that Lenin, this letter that Lenin wrote, which is very long. He makes it very clear that, you know, that really organization should follow the needs of the particular struggle at that time. If you go through this, it's very interesting because they'll talk about forming three people that are cells. It's very complicated. I read the whole thing twice and, you know, it's interesting. But his point always was that there needs to be flexibility of organization, but it doesn't mean that centralism,
We have
another question.
another question from our audience. My question is
I
about
feel
being.
like
You didn't
this is
finish
easy.
the answer.
Well, I want to
okay.
get.
Go
I
ahead,
figure
go
we should
ahead.
get them
Okay,
all
go ahead,
in,
go
right?
ahead.
I mean,
Go
you
ahead.
know, before we do it, I just got it. My question is about how being part of Workers' World Party affects our daily life, like the outside perception from family or friends.
Okay.
I guess that's how
Daily
they
life.
see us.
Okay, no problem. So anyhow, back on the centralism. I think the simplest, most mundane way of explaining it is that we have democracy within our own organization. That is, people make democratic decisions on, well, let me try to think of some way of explaining it. Some of it's that we have such a rich history, we don't need to go through a whole decision on how we feel about the People's Democratic Republic of Korea and the war threats against it. So there's not necessarily any need for us to do that because we've already kind of agreed upon that. So what we may debate about is what to do about the US war threats. Now, there could be a situation where there's some interesting international development that the party hasn't encountered in the past where we don't already have a position on, if you know what I'm saying. I can't think of anything off the top of my head because we've, you know, but it's possible. It's certainly possible that something could develop where we'd have to just have a long political discussion on how we deal with stuff. I know I come out of an era where there were long political discussions. I'm trying to think of a very good example, though we had a firm position about when the Black Panther Party was under attack by the state and how we are going to respond to that. So we have a lot of democracy. Democracy is key in terms of internally, but where does this does that mean? It means that once we've made a decision, it doesn't matter whether I disagreed with Rosica on something, and I might have been in a minority within the organization. I'm going to carry that out as best I can. Because what Lenin, why the Soviet Union was the first revolution and was possible, is because he built a combat party that could really move on the head of a dime, could spin on the head of a dime. And it also at the same time, it was united and strong. It wasn't like, for instance, I'll give good examples, and I mean no harm, but, be very honest. The Green Party, where you could be a member of the Green Party and one of you is for capitalism and the other's for the invasion of Syria, is opposed to capitalism. You can have 20 different positions and you can run all over the place and do what the hell you pleased. If we ran Andre for mayor and you didn't like him, maybe you wouldn't support him. So the power of centralism is basically, and then I'll get down to the concretes of Baltimore. The power of centralism is that how can you win? And this is partly the answer to the anarchism question. How can you win a struggle? How can you fight a beast like U.S. imperialism and the state apparatus and all the police and everything else that's, aimed against us, including also the media and all, the education system, all the bad propaganda that people get every day. If you're not united and centralized, you just can't win. I could get into real concrete explanations of that, but I think that's good enough for that. Locally, we're organized on a very simple basis because we're still a rather small party compared to the Democratic Party or some group like the Green Party. And that is that we have weekly membership meetings. If you're a member or a candidate, you come to them. We have agendas and we discuss out what we're going to do. We do have leadership. We have an elected, what's called an elected national committee. And we generally have national calls and leadership calls to discuss important stuff. And then we have lots and lots of other bodies within the party that do things. There is the newspaper, so there's tons and tons of different committees that people, but basically, the highest body in any Marxist-Leninist party is its membership. And we are still in the process of both reorganizing ourselves because we're growing. So very honestly, a lot of our now candidates and new members and anybody who wants to be on them, because generally we haven't had any problems. We have a national committee list. People respect that. There is an elected national committee in Baltimore. We haven't set up elections again, and there's a commission that's going to be studying how to do that. So I'm being very open about, both where we're at and where we need to be at. But ultimately, foreign parties have delegated conferences where they vote on stuff. So I don't know if that answers it a little bit.
Yeah.
But hey, the part on the anarcho-communist stuff, we have, especially recently, done everything that we can possibly do to act as principled as possible and to support the anarchist against the state, particularly united. And I think that Taryn, and I know that Andrew and others have, and both Lenin and Marx engaged in long polemics about,
No.
how can you put it, somewhere between social believe that the state would go on forever and ever, and anarchists who didn't believe there was a need to smash the old state and create temporarily, I have to underscore that because that was Lenin's and Marx's always approach, temporarily, what they call the working class being able to defend itself and organize itself, its militias against the old ruling class apparatus. So that's a lot of word verbiage, but it's true. Andre, maybe you could talk about learning. Was that somebody trying to bring their bike in?
I just realized this whole table is crooked.
Steven.
Hi, Steven.
Steve, okay, so I don't know. I think about, I'm gonna shut up, but just to say that, the thing about putting things into your daily life, and I think a couple other people should talk about their own experiences, David, Andre, anybody else, Archie, about, what it's meant for your family life. I think, maybe they should open up and I can tell you how I had to deal with my family when I was very young, but, we do want to walk the walk and talk the talk, you can't come into this room. I got to be honest with doing this stuff, and it may make some people nervous, but I don't really care. You can't say you're a communist or a revolutionary socialist, and then you go out to the white sisters, brothers, and siblings here, and then end up becoming racist and cussing somebody out who cut you off in your car. That's not like communist behavior. So we really aspire never to do that. Do people make mistakes? I am sure. But we really aspire not to go counter to being socialist. We do aspire within our own organization to have each other's backs at all time. It doesn't mean that we can live like, I am sure that, I live in East Baltimore and somebody else lives out in the county, to give up your extra whatever, if you have a better coat than this. We're not saying any of that. So we do know there's inequality, but we're always mindful of that. And we strive to eliminate that. But Archie had something. Archie had their hand up.
I think in talking about, I don't know, I can't remember specifically what this question was about, right? If it was communism in one's daily life and or communism with one's family.
It was both.
Okay.
Perception.
How does it affect our daily
How
life?
do
Yeah,
people see
so
or-
it's like, I don't, not to like tell my whole life story, but let me just tell my whole life story real quick. So I come from like the US military background. So we're talking like the beast, right? Like my father is like, and it took me a long time to come to terms with this, but like my father is essentially a war criminal, right? Like I know what he's done. I know who he sold weapons to. You know what I mean? Like that's what I came out of. That's the sort of mentality I was born into. And I was 14. I tried to join the Young Person's Socialist League, and my mother said, "No, we're a military family, and that's very wrong. And you can't do that because your dad will lose his job or whatever. Being a socialist is very bad and against the rules." And I was like, okay. And so I always sort of grew up under this feeling like I was being watched and surveilled, and it was very like so. Whatever. I get out, I go to college, and I'm a very like armchair academic Marxist who, reads Marx in college, doesn't, but I didn't functionally do anything about it, right? I just knew that like I didn't do anything about it. And then, after graduating, I sort of fell in with Workers' World Party. And that really changed a lot of things for me, because now instead of just thinking about it and stewing in it and just seeing how wrong everything was, I could do something about it. Even if it's just putting up flyers for the next thing that we're doing, that's still, that is doing something. Also just like the pure therapeutic value of like being in the room with people, that was one of the first things that I really recognized, that I was like, I'm not alone in this. Right. And I'm not just arguing with my friends about this. I am like, with like-minded people who really want to change the world. So, and I think like, that was what, like last fall or so, I became involved with Workers' World. And since then, first of all, I have a lot more arguments with my friends. I know a lot more. I know a lot more about, say, the conflict in Syria or the history of the DPRK. or the history of the Soviet Union. I actually just know way more stuff now because communists hold these positions and people just generally like scoff at, and I had to like I had to figure out, you know, what I believed and figure out how to argue these things and you know, so I would say I argue a lot more. I know a lot more. My parents are just kind of like, they're like, whatever like strange child does. You know, they're not like rabid anti-communists or like rabidly they're not super conservative or anything, so they're just kind of like, whatever gets you through the day, I guess. Like, you're wrong, but whatever. And then I guess, I mean, the other real thing is that like it's just the difference between riding the bus and like leaving a newspaper on the bus. So that's what I want to, that's my piece.
David?
I guess I'll put myself on the thing. So hey everyone, I'm David. I've been involved with Workers' World Party since May 1st, 2014. So a little while now. What I thought was really interesting, and someone told this to me, and this is kind of how I have like a slightly different take. My, you know, family and stuff gives me a hard time about it. But what I think is really interesting is when you start doing the work, people respect you a lot more than when you're like, I hate capitalism and I hate all this stuff, and you know, all this stuff's really good and everything about society is really bad. Everyone says, oh, you're just so negative. You always hate everything. You're just always upset about everything. But then, and I started getting involved and I started doing stuff, and people would ask me, oh, what are you up to? And I'm like, oh, well, you know, we're going, you know, door to door in you know, public housing, and, you know, we're having this march this week, and we're, you know, protesting police brutality. We're doing this. And everyone's like, wow, David, you're really talking the talk before, but now you're really walking the walk. That's pretty cool. Like, you know, like I take you more seriously because you're actually doing it. So there's that. Yeah, I would say that's much more my like thing of it. My family or whatever, everyone's. My grandmother actually has been like, oh, socialism, not communism. Maybe you're all onto something. I think, you know, this is. I think there's something to it. And my other family's like, but David, everything you say, that's not what communists believe. I'm like, but actually it is. But you just don't know that. So I don't know. Perceptions, it'll cause family conflict. But, you know, hey, if you're even thinking about joining this organization, you probably already have family conflict.
Andrew, do you?
Yeah,
listen. Gina,
You had your hand.
Either way. I don't.
I've been working with the party since maybe January.
Yeah.
But I've been a Marxist-Leninist for much longer. And you're like, and I want to address both the family thing and like your daily life thing. It's going to differ wildly family to family. I'm not going to act like there's one simple formula for dealing with your family and telling your family. I mean, my own parents are fairly apolitical and like didn't talk much about politics growing up. And I've, you know, I can sneak stuff in and like sort of talk. I mean, I've told my mother like I was a socialist at one point, and I can talk to my brother. Like, he's pretty sure from what he's hearing from me that socialism's pretty good, right? But yeah, I mean, it's gonna have to vary family to family. If you have to not tell your parents that you're a member of the Workers' World Party, and that you're walking out of the door with a bunch of flyers under your arm to promote like a concert or something, then if you really want to stay with it, then that's what you're gonna have to do. Or you can, if you feel comfortable enough, you can be really out and explicit about it and engage in political discussion with your family all the time, for better or for worse. But it's really about what you think you're going to be able to do. Like, if it seems like you have to keep your nose clean in order to continue, you know, working with the party, then that's what you're going to have to do. As far as your family life goes, like, it's really about what your capacity is. In your daily life. I mean, I work full time, but I've dedicated most of my evenings to whatever it is. I wish I had more time to dedicate to like playing music or just like having it even to myself to just read. but I mean, I know that this is what I want to do. This is what needs to happen. So my thing is, I'm a Marxist, so that I don't have to be a Marxist anymore.
That revolution.
Like once we finish
Right.
what we're here to start, then I'll have so much more time and so much more security to like. I can be a full-time musician if I wanted to, and I would have some sort of security.
Right.
It's not based on market forces or whatever. That's my thing.
Gina and Gina, you had your hand up, and the Noodles. We gotta give Noodles a chance.
So I just thought I'd jump in because I haven't told my parents, so I kind of am coming from that side of things. And there's multiple reasons as to why. And, it's kind of like this weird, I don't have like an answer either. But this is just like, if anyone else is like in this situation, like I am in it too. I'm kind of like, so I own my own business. And I'm like, of course, I have to like promote myself on Facebook as a business. Most of my business has been through friends and coworkers. I have a giant like black who are like blocked from seeing certain posts because I want to be vocal and I want to share my experiences, and I'm posting pictures of all of our marches, and I want to I make posters and I want to share it and put it out, and then I kind of have to scale back and I have to block certain people, and it is very tiring. I'd like to get it to the point where it's not that way, but I think it's also understood that sometimes it can't be, you can't always be out right at the start, if that makes sense. You have to do what's good for you. And, I'm unemployed otherwise. So I have to do everything I can to build this business that I have, because it's really all that I've got. And I have my parents because they're helping me out financially. So that's why, and they're also super conservative. And every time I call my dad, ever since I started discussing socialism, let's talk about this. And I've gotten into debates with him every time I call my dad. He's has some reason as to why communism is bad, and it usually makes no sense. It's not even correct. And I just think it's hilarious. So you'll get, you talk to me enough, you'll get oh, my dad said this today stories. But I think that'll come with time. So if you aren't able to be out in the open with your family, that's okay. I mean, it's not certainly it's kind of a burden on you. I feel it a lot. And I feel oh no, am I inadequate? Am I not doing a good job? But for now, it's just what it has to be. And at least I'm contributing and I'm going to things and I'm getting out there. And I have talked with my coworkers and I have tried to spread this message, and they're very receptive, which I was surprised about. But that's good. So I think in time. So I don't have an answer. I'm there with you.
Andre.
Well, I sort of come from a different experience of the folks at the end of the table. I'm the youngest of 6. At age 15, I came out of the closet, realized it was a gay male. And my family, I guess maybe because my older brothers and sisters were, the next one above me is 4 years older. When they go out and do something, what we do is, the children, we just go, I'm going out. I grew up in Baltimore County. There really wasn't a lot of trouble to get into, tell you the truth. Even though we wish there was, it was kind of boring actually as a teenager sometimes. And my parents never questioned the children in the family. Where are you going? Who are you going with? And what are you going to do? What time are you going out? When are you coming back? And I, growing up as a young gay man, as a teenager and then young gay adult in my 20s, I hear stories from so many people whose parents wanted to know everything like that. So I had a free reign to do a lot of stuff. Became an activist in the gay community starting when I was 21 years old. I'm now 62, so I've been activist for a while. And then I met Workers' World Party when I was 21. After I met them, I went back to school and then came around again when I was little older in, where was that? In my mid-20s, and we began to organize for a May 3rd march in the Pentagon against Ronald Reagan's war in El Salvador. So most of the time was spent out of my house. But our parents were never the kind that questioned what you do. As long as we weren't getting in trouble, we
Yeah,
were
right.
at the police
That's the same
station,
like that.
they were fine.
Right.
They were absolutely fine.
More
Now, the other part of that is my 2 sisters and 1 brother became Jehovah's Witness. so we basically knew where they was going. I was sort of the wayward child. Each family is different. Everybody's story is unique. You don't, I spoke to a class of the meeting of the Rainbow Club at Essex Community College, and people were telling just similar stories to hear when they came out with their parents and such. And there was one guy that his face just, and he was like, I really can't tell my parents I'm gay. They're really conservative, really religious. And a couple of us explained to him that was okay, if that's what he had to do to maintain. It was all right not to tell them. Soon he's going to grow up and be an adult and be out on his own. I've heard many stories when I was younger of young kids. 17-year-old named Robert decided to tell his parents he was gay, and his father said, get out of the house, and he wouldn't leave. His father went and got a 2x4, stood and held it over his head. You're leaving now, or I'm cracking this over your head. Luckily, there was enough adult support around in the Baltimore Gay Alliance that they took this child in at age 17 that had been put up from his family. So we all have different roads that we take. Thing is, when you become a socialist, you can apply what we feel. I guess get kind of esoteric or something like that. But on your everyday lives, we're not only against the state, but it's how you interact with each other. When you learn we are all the working class, we have to go out and sell our labor power to make a living. That's what makes us the working class. Those business owners are the ones that hire us, and we'll get into that later on down the road. But we also see how we interact with each other. I had to unlearn some things. Sometimes I try to be a nice person, because sometimes my temper gets really short. I'm in the McDonald's and they get the order all screwed up, and I'm like, wait a minute, what have you done here? And my boyfriend, he helped me. He kind of put me in place. He said, you know better than that. You of all people know better than that. So now I measure the way I interact with people when my patience is really short. I'm ready to choke people because they're getting everything wrong. But that's the way we look at other members of the working class. I have no right to trounce on them because they go to work just like I do to try to make a living. They have families that they have to support. Maybe they may be a single mother trying to support 2 or 3 children. We don't have the right. And when you become a socialist and you begin to look and observe the working class, you really don't want to. You begin to feel a oneness with the working class. So that makes you get out there and fight for socialism even more, for people's needs before profits, because you see what capitalism does to people, how dirty it really treats people. And socialism is such a better system, but we have to fight for it.
Great. Muhammad, I apologize to you. Muhammad actually had his hand up earlier, but that's okay. No problem. Muhammad, go ahead.
The main way it's really affected me in my personal and family life is just more so, I think one of the most important things, whether or not you're going to openly start screaming outside that you're a communist, is that you're doing and saying what you should be. So for example, my dad is a racist Black Muslim Arab man. And let me tell you, they are the funnest ones. So whenever he's a Trump supporter too, it still blows me to this day. I don't get it. That's a side note. But where that's important is even with your family, even with your close friends, you have to be willing to call them out on the things that they say that you know is wrong. Like, for example, even small things, like somebody just using a remotely offensive term. You have to make sure that they understand, like, hey, that's kind of messed up. You shouldn't do that. Even if it's something bigger, then you definitely should just do it. But it's about being able to tell people what you are, because at the end of the day, if you're not practicing what you believe, then you're not that.
True.
If you're not willing to tell your family the things that, but again, you don't even have to tell your family, hey, by the way, Stalin wasn't that bad of a, you don't have to tell them that. What you do have to say is when they say something that can even be just a simple microaggression, you just let them know that it's not right. If they say, why do I have to refer to them as they, them? They cut that shit out right then and there. That's really the only way to majorly affect me.
Rosica, did you have, I know you're behind the camera, so.
You can't break the fourth wall.
I didn't get your name and I apologize. Go ahead. Pardon?
Rose.
Okay, Rose.
I just want to hop off that. I've heard a lot of people like say that kind of thing when it comes to like using the correct pronouns around people at all times. But of course, there are a lot of circumstances in certain contexts that you should be a little sensitive about it. Like if of course they're with their parents and they're not out to their parents, don't use the correct pronouns with them. But also like calling people out. Like if you're like a 16-year-old in an abusive household, I feel like that's kind of, you should gauge whether you should call them out. And we can't really fault people for not always able to extenuating the circumstances.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback. Intentions are the most important thing, I think. It's the intentions of anything, because I've read some things where calling in is, when you talk to people, talking to people privately about stuff is important too. So if your intentions is just to make your ego feel better, it may backfire. So if your intentions are to support somebody, as you were saying, Rose, I think that's like critical. That's important. We didn't answer all the questions, and we can keep going around. David, you had your hand up. There's a couple other questions. You had your hand up, David.
Yeah, I wanted to address one of the things, which I think was that, Audrey, is it your question about leaders and violent
Just what I want to
stuff?
talk about too. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then I hope I don't steal everything you wanted to say about it. I was going to say about that, it's complicated because socialism it's existed. Socialist systems of varying degrees have existed in, what became the Soviet Union, China, large parts of Africa, Cuba, socialist movements all over. And all of them are like fight for control and like sovereignty and like their way to like put power into our class all over everywhere, because like the rich and powerful, the landlords, the capitalists, the bankers, the whoever, don't give up without a fight. And so nowhere has it just been like easy, where it's like where no tough decisions had to be made, and no, probably violence had to be used that maybe didn't necessarily have to be used, but hindsight's 20/20, and maybe not everything goes exactly the way we would like it to go. The world's a messy place. I think the others, and so I think that you got to have a little bit of nuance with some of it. The other half of that is, I wouldn't say to like excuse all of the so-called millions of deaths under communism, because they didn't happen. Like a large portion of them. I mean, that's not to say that like people didn't die. I'll tell you, people have died because it's a life or death struggle for our class. That's strength. The other part is they lie. They lie so much about so many things. I mean, like just so much is just not true, or is totally taken out of context. The way they arrive at like the millions of people who died in the Soviet Union is they take a birth rate and then so it's like, okay, so we're projecting a 3% birth rate or, or in population increase, whatever. And then in 10 years, they look at that and wow, it only grows by like 1%. That's 40 million people. That's literally how they got a lot of the numbers. Like Robert Conquest, if anyone's familiar with that name, he wrote a book called The Black Book of Communism, which is a really anti-communist book. And that's actually his methodology for saying that Stalin killed 40 million people, whatever it was. That's not to say people didn't die. There wasn't like, a brutal class struggle, but so much of it like that's bunk. That doesn't make any sense. It's not real. They did the same thing with Mao. They did that people, and the reality is messy, but it's a little different. So I'd say like, the real thing is to study these people. Like you're going to study what Stalin said or what Mao said, Lenin, because if you go into like the common sense too much, every communist leader is a bad, evil person because the ruling class doesn't like them. They don't want you to follow anyone that says that the working class needs liberation, whether it's Stalin or Lenin even, or, Marx himself. They say all sorts of terrible things about Marx, even though he didn't do anything but write books and lead protests and write theory and stuff. I think that's it.
Rose, you had your hand up?
It's okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted, I guess it's not the violence that really, I know I started with that, because I remember being at the conference and you had said the violence of the oppressed never equals the violence of the oppressed. It's like, I was reading over this earlier, and like the way that this man kind of describes, like, I don't know, that he uses Fidel to talk about like all Cubans at the same time, and how, like, I don't know, he treats them as a Christ-like figure, and that's kind of when I read a lot of the writing, it's all like very hero worshiping. And so I was wondering if there's like room for like do I have to like love everybody? I think that's more what I was trying to
That's
say.
what I thought you were trying to say too. I didn't quite take it the way David took it. No, I took it the same way. And I actually was going to say, interestingly enough, when Fidel died, part of what his wishes were, and this is objective truth completely, was that no street get named after him, no statues be made of him. He had this whole thing against that kind of thing. I mean, there's a thin line between it. You don't have to, Marxism is a science. It's not, religion, though we feel very passionately about a lot of folks. And people have done heroic things in a lot of senses. If you study the Cuban Revolution and what they were up against and the torture of the Batista regime and the sacrifices they made, it's sort of appealing to the emotional sentiments of people who have endured and overcome so much that's almost heroic. And so what you're reading, it may sound like, oh, this is heaven on earth. But for instance, I've traveled to Cuba and you talk to the Cubans will tell you very honestly, and when we get to this, which I think we should kind of transition over to the next discussion, they will tell you very honestly that they have a lot to still do in building their socialism. They'll be the first to admit that they have not eradicated racism in Cuba, eradicated LGBTQ bigotry, or they have not completely fully liberated women from the shackles of patriarchy. But there's explanations from that from a Marxist point of view. In other words, understanding the economic conditions, what they've been up against. So it's like anybody who's really thoughtful as a socialist or a revolutionary will never claim that any of these countries or any attempts to build socialism have amounted to some perfect paradise. On the other hand, compared to the US, and compared to, you compare Cuba to Haiti, and I've been to both places. Haiti is hell on earth, and Cuba, amazingly, is much better than living in Baltimore. But I don't want to get into all the great things. I'm just saying, you don't have to hero worship anybody. In fact, Fidel himself was opposed to hero worship. This was his birth. I got to be honest with you. This piece was a piece that was put out on his birthday. I think it was right after they thought that he was going to die when he was first sick. So anyhow, let me shut up. If there's any other pressing questions, we'll take them, but then I like to go into our next part. No, he said never mind.
Did you want to say something?
Did you have, okay, so let's go into the second. You can say it, go ahead, and you go. By the way, there's no question that's bad, wrong, or whatever, and you can disagree, it's no big deal. I've heard everything, trust me.
I'm rescinding my hand.
Okay, you also have the right to rescind your hand. Okay, I'm gonna go into this next thing. I'm a visual person because I really, many months ago, Archie and myself were supposed to develop a meme. We got busy. So I put this up here so that we could have sort of a structured conversation. And people, we're not going to walk away with some deep, deep understanding of the entire capitalist economy and all of the differences. But it's important to just know a little bit of this, because I never take it for granted that people know anything about socialism, even when their gut just tells them, I want to join Workers' World Party, or I want to get involved in this fight. I never take that for granted. Number two, if you have read 2,000 books, as I was saying to Rasika, and you can't explain the simple stuff, then you didn't understand the 2,000 books. So don't mind the very basicness of this, but it's helpful to me anyhow. And it'll be helpful to Archie and me, because when they take notes, they will be able to come up with something great. So what I wrote is a comparison chart. And the first thing is some of the features of capitalism and some of the features of socialism. And I want you all to kind of fill in the blanks. Like capitalism means private ownership. It means the means of production are privately owned. What did people think that Marx meant when he said the means of production are privately owned? What means of production is he talking about? It's important because I'll explain why. Somebody yell out anything. Andre? Emily? The means of production. What do they mean by that? If you don't know, it's okay.
The materials, the environment, the methods, the tools.
Yeah. Factories,
Tools by
mines.
which things are produced.
Farms,
Things are produced.
land.
Things that we need to live, things that we buy.
Things that produce other wealth, like factories, raw
Farms.
materials, like Rose was talking about, farms. I say that because when I was a kid, everybody threw back at us socialism's for public ownership, meaning all the people own stuff. Now, you know what they used to tell me when I was young? They told me never read the
Toothbrushes.
Communist Manifesto, and it was during SNCC's time, and they didn't want me to read stuff from Stokely Carmichael. But anyhow, it was later Quamatory. But anyhow, the public ownership part of it and the private ownership, it's because I used to say, communists want to take away your toothbrush.
Yes.
This is serious.
They still
still
say
do.
that.
They still say
say
that. Okay, so it's not just me.
And I've decided that I am
That's
coming
why
with a toothbrush.
The
Come
private
again.
ownership of the means of production means factories, mines, things that produce wealth. It's not about your this jacket, the toothbrush, all your little stuff. It's not like, my poor dad and mom, who are very poor working class people, they're very poor. But they thought, oh my God, Sharon, you've become a communist and you believe you're going to take away, whatever little that we have in our house. So
Well, there's
And
an
it's
important
not
distinction
about
between personal property and private property.
exactly.
Private is in the private sector.
Right.
Public is in the public sector. But personal is in your individual self.
Absolutely.
I like that.
So that's very good.
Say that.
And Archie's got that down.
What?
Okay.
I'm right there.
We got it down on video. So the second part is production for profit. I mean, by the way, all these things flow together. So it's not like you can schematically take them apart. They all form a general whole part, holistic. Production for profit or individual profit is what capitalism is about. And what socialism is about is people's needs, not profit. Now, the famous saying is from each according to their ability to each according to their need. Does anybody want to say what they feel that means? Stephen, you got your hand up?
It means what you're capable is you should be encouraged to do to the best of your ability. And according to your needs is you should acquire what you need. All human beings acquire certain things. So shelter, food, healthcare, those things are needs. And your ability, if you have a very great aptitude for something, then the society should actually steer you in a direction and develop you to develop that ability.
Rose?
It also speaks to the ways that what humans as in like human beings subjects of capitalism / communism, what we need is we only really holistically, compassionately produced. Like the kinds of things that capitalism produces are entirely unnecessary, and we're driven to consume them by capitalism.
Yeah, like we don't need a Reese's peanut butter cup Oreo. I mean, it's good. It's nice. Like we don't need like 15 kinds of Oreo.
But we
definitely don't need Peeps Oreo.
do if we want them, though.
Yeah,
We
you're
do,
right.
yeah, we do if we want them, but the market produces things not because we need them, but because they might, based on studies and based on focus groups, might be able to turn a profit. If the people decide Oreos, then like the people can have Reese's Oreos. It's not like there's no fun under communism. That's not what we're saying, but yeah, definitely. Like capitalism produces this stuff that like the people like.
Archie's getting into the second thing about the planned economy,
Oh,
but I want to, no, it's cool. I want to underscore what Stephen said again and say it in a different way. It means that everybody eats. Everybody needs food in this world.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone should get food. Whether I'm old and I can't talk as fast as Archie, which I can't, or run as fast as Andrew, or, beat up the Nazis, we should all get to eat. Emily?
One of the things with the capitalist economy too is it kind of just, thank you, Rose, kind of just produces stuff for its own fucking sake of producing
Right.
more and more. It's totally
Mhm.
unsustainable. If we're going to think about this from an environmental perspective, capitalism is bad for the earth, and it's eating itself alive and destroying the earth.
Yes.
So by moving into more of a economy that is just more rational, it'll make itself more sustainable. Yeah, and in the long run.
It kind of just shows. Sorry to interrupt. Right?
No, you're fine.
It kind of just shows the ways that like capitalism, like especially industrial capitalism, is based on like Enlightenment thought, like the idea of infinite growth and like striving towards like forever and forever. And I remember, I know, is that necessary? And I remember some like my other friends were talking about like, oh, if we do ever like achieve like communism, we might need to like go to other planets to mine their ores or whatever the fuck. It's like, but no, though. The only reason we need more materials is because capitalism just sucks out of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do believe that. Mohammed, did you have your hand up? Anybody else?
I was just
Gary?
laughing.
Yes. Okay, so production for profit or individual, when it says individual profit, they mean for the individual capitalists. And by the way, when we went into here and we were talking about private ownership of capital, which are the means of production, capitalist stands, the word capital is in front of capitalism. And people's needs, not profit. It really means everyone needs to be taken care of. And I tell you, just to give you a small antidote, when I was in Cuba, it was interesting because I was in this apartment complex and there were like doctors living in the complex, people of all nationalities. And I stayed with a family that worked in a cigar factory. I think that's changed now with the cigar factories. I don't want to talk about that part. But the interesting thing is that the differences in economic salaries and how people were treated was vastly more equal than the U.S. The whole Cuban economy has not eradicated all inequalities, but compared to the U.S., you would never see a doctor living in an apartment building with somebody who was a factory worker. Just, you wouldn't see it. Okay, so on to the free market economy is capitalism, which means goods and services are produced on the basis of what is profitable. Free, I put that in parentheses because, have you ever noticed that under capitalism, they like to coin that word free, every kid, free this, free that. I don't know what they just put that up there for propaganda. But this gets into what Archie was talking about, centralized economic planning or planned economy. And what Archie was saying is absolutely accurate. In a socialist society, the people as a whole, it can be different mechanisms about how they decide to do this. And you can argue about the mechanisms. That's an interesting argument. But basically, the people as a whole plan what is needed in the economy. In Cuba, they go for months and months and months of discussions in every factory, every workplace about how much are we going to produce of sugar cane, or how much are we going to make of cars. I'm just using funny examples, but they make a plan and then they pass it. And they have all sorts of different bodies that do that. So there can be all sorts of different ways of centrally planning things. It can be through a government. It may not be as good if it's a bureaucratic one, but go ahead.
I think it's like an interesting distinction to draw between capitalism and socialism when it comes to the market / the economy is that when it comes to the centralized economic planning, it's like juxtaposed with the competition, the impromptu, like all these like feral cats fighting each other over the market. And just kind of going for whoever wants whatever. But this is more for socialism. Socialism is more for like cooperative benefit. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Also want to make
Andrew?
I'd like to make a point about like free stuff under capitalism, because the phrase is nothing in life is free, you got to pay for everything, blah blah blah. But that's for the working class.
Right. That's true.
The ruling class loves when shit is free. Like that is when it's at its most profitable, was when you acquire, then you can then profit off of it, which is why you have settler colonialism. You can just if you just murder a bunch of people, then you have their land for free, right? And that's just one example.
People, yeah, it's free.
Yeah. And if you can imprison an entire nation or community, their labor is essentially free. So, yeah.
Stephen?
Just to give historical background to the term free market, which actually was coined by Adam Smith, who they consider the father of capitalist economics. And what he was referring to was that the state, that the economy was free from the state. Everything was run based on capitalists or owners being free to produce and to exchange whatever they want, and that the state had no interference. So it was free from the state, and that's where the whole free market actually came from. But the interesting thing, there is no free market capitalism in the world. They, in the US, the state actually works to benefit the capitalists. Adam Smith, laissez-faire capitalism would mean there'd be no bailout. The banks would not have been bailed out.
You know, decent, affordable, or free food, which Ross can talk about how bad Baltimore is compared to LA, you know, or real food sources, whatever it is, we would then make the decision to produce it. But the market, what is profitable is what decides that, what is most profitable. So let's go down to these two things. I don't want to keep people here all night because we could talk forever. But I put this down, competition versus solidarity. When we put down competition, it's kind of obvious competition is part of capitalism. But what I think that most people don't think about what capitalism promotes, they know it's competition between big businesses, between corporations and capitalist owners, which is another big issue, because part of what Stephen says, you talk about how they ameliorate that part of it. But the part that people don't think about is how capitalism as a system forces workers to compete with each other.
Mm.
It forces workers in India to compete with workers in California. And they keep trying to lower the wages in that way. So it's a global system that creates division among are competing. They're selling their labor power in the capitalist market and they're constantly competing.
Really, I love talking about that, like the the individual, like as a promotes competition, and that's the way that division is made. Like, for example, like the gender division of labor, and that further obfuscates class consciousness because you think of yourself as an individual so much you can't see any similarity with others who you're competing with.
Right.
And if you can't see yourself as a class, then you can't liberate your class.
That is profound, I think. That's true. Muhammad, and then Don.
Something that is also like one of those annoying arguments that you hear, like capitalists always say whenever you say, "Oh, by the way, communism is a great idea," is what about the private business? Someone says that. Just remind them that corporations have effectively made it impossible for a private business owner to actually grow. Because if I own a little mom and pop little store, I guarantee you, if Domino's opens up 2 doors down, I don't own that store.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
John?
Yeah, one thing too about capitalism and talking about free markets, competition, all these things, is there's a lot of propaganda and a lot of mythology around these things are organic and natural, and they're not organic and natural, and that's one thing that we all that markets work in a organic and natural way, and oppression, white supremacy, patriarchy, everything is natural and organic, and this is systematic, but it's not something that you should try and change because it is organic and natural. And that's, I think, being socialist, being communist, being committed to deconstructing those things and destroying those things, you have to reject that notion at all costs.
True.
That's two profound things in one. If we don't have solidarity, we don't have anything. And really, that's why we talked about a global strike, general strike. It's not because we think that will happen this May 1st. It's because the ideas of a worker in India and somebody in California, a worker in Africa or somebody in Asia, us uniting is the most powerful weapon that we have. So I want to end with this thing at the end, which they don't put. Look, I looked up comparisons. You can look this junk up in Google. And I'm always interested. Most of it says that, I don't want to get into some of it because capitalism's so good, how it's so wonderful for us, how it promotes production, and we'll end with a little discussion on that. But I wanted to talk about this because nobody says anything about this under Google. And that's that capitalism promotes divisions. And it does it in a myriad of ways. I mean, racism, sexism, LGBTQ bigotry, war, imperialism, all of it is a part of the capitalist system. And I got this over here because I want to make it very clear that at least our position is socialism lays the basis to end this stuff. It doesn't mean that automatically patriarchy dies or that the ideologies that have been promoted by class divisions will suddenly wither away of their own. It's that socialism, because it is a system that's based on planning, it also means it's a system where education and struggle around education can start to work on some level. And I guess I keep using the Cuba thing because we're going to do this Che Guevara brigades, which we'll eventually talk to people about. But, and I just finished reading this book again, actually 2 times on Fidel, is that, they admit so freely that they're still fighting some of this stuff and that they made mistakes in the revolution and the ascension of the revolution. So it's not like we think that racism will automatically end, but the the class, concrete, material reasons for its existence will not be there. It won't mean that it'll go away in people's ideas in their heads right away because, I was taught by my mother, I taught my son, Archie was taught by their parents, has different background baggage. But the next generation gets closer and closer to being free. But you missed it. Patriarchy is complicated, but it did arise out of a class society rising. So anyhow, I talked a little bit too long on that. Archer, you had your hand up on that.
I mean, I just wanted to speak on this in from a couple different angles, right? Like, first of all, just that.
You don't have to look at it. I'm just letting people know who's speaking.
Just that. Like, I think that getting deeper in, and we can't, we can talk about this for hours, like deeper into like how does capitalism promote racism and sexism and hatred against like trans and queer peoples, like, and indigenous peoples of the world, like how, like why are those two things interlinked? Because I think that's an unpopular case to make, and that's a case that a lot of people like. Hillary Clinton personally was like, if we dismantle the banks, then we'll still have racism. She's making the case. Last year, she makes this case that capitalism and racism aren't interlinked, right? But we know this to be false because the capitalist economy of the United States is founded on like centuries of slavery and oppression and massacre of indigenous peoples, right? Like the profits that capitalists made starting this country, the profits that it's founded on were founded on labor that was wrongfully taken. Like it is a massive system of like racism and exploitation. It's not just like a feeling that we have that, it's not just I feel that like it would be advantageous to my argument to say that capitalism and racism are not one and the same, but deeply and organically inextricable from each other. It is like just literally like it is true. And yeah, so I had more I wanted to say, but I don't remember what it was, so it's fine.
It's okay. Rose had their hand up, and then Mohammed.
I think this is really important because we can talk about the ways in which racism, like white supremacy, misogyny, are integral to capitalism, and that they were founded upon those things, as Archie said a second ago. But it's also interesting when you think about anti-racist and anti-patriarchal activisms. Like if they don't confront capitalism, then you can't possibly for those people. Like they're inextricable in that they're integral to each other, especially the ways that gender and the ways that, as you said, white supremacy founded U.S. The U.S. economy. I think that's what I was saying.
Yep.
I'm kind of just piggybacking off what you guys have said. It's very important to link any anti-oppressive movement with communism. In fun fact, I just had to check myself to make sure I wasn't wrong. Russia legalized gay marriage in, I think, right after the Russian Revolution. So communists are very, very, very anti-oppressive in every type of sense. Very important to note.
Explain the capitalism.
Emily, and then
Exactly.
By the way, while Emily speaks, I'm not trying to, but I forgot to pass this around for people in the class. Please write your name down so I can definitely make sure that you get notice of everything else in next classes.
I think it's important to bring in as many socialism. I think we also need to understand that the oppressions that like oppressed groups face are different. And we need to like recognize those and like really analyze those and find out what they are, and take specific efforts on those. So like undocumented workers will have the threat of deportation over their head their entire time they're working in wherever the hell it is they're working. And women face specific issues in their labor, in that most women's labor isn't recognized as labor. Them are solidarity as workers. Those are just some of the ones that first come to my head. But those are all socialist issues. I don't know. I think we should really make a point to centralize them.
Okay. Before calling you, David, is there anybody else? Because I don't, like sometimes people are shy. Sierra, do you have anything that you wanted to add or say?
I'm just listening. I'm here.
That's cool.
Everything.
She's just telling with the cool glass.
No problem. Anybody else? David, you want to go ahead?
I just wanted to say that it's one thing that I think is so important when we talk about all these different oppressions is that our struggle against them isn't out of like charity or like some sense of compassion, although it should be as well, but out of the fact that like fighting all of these fight for our own liberation, whichever, oppressions we may have, down to simply being a worker, under capitalism. So like, white people should fight against racism, not out of a sense of charity, but, but because, we won't get socialism, we won't get the things we, need as the working class without it, without that unity. And, men need to fight the same reasons to, because we all have to be united, and, et cetera, for every single possible thing. And so like, I definitely think that each struggle is so important for that reason alone. Like don't fight everything for somebody else, fight it for yourself. I mean, fight it for them too, but you can't always rely on your own sense of like charity and compassion towards other people, but you can definitely rely on your own self-interest, and it's always in your own self-interest to fight against those things.
Rose, and then I was going to call myself.
Two things to say. I worry about emphasizing egoism when it comes to, or I guess just egoist like forms of charity, as you said. But because like I don't know, when it comes to like, for example, economic planning, you kind of have to be aware of and cognizant of and working towards the benefit of others besides yourself.
Right.
It's inherently selfless. A second thing, Mohammed, you said that, for example, after the Russian Revolution in 1922, they legalized gay marriage. But I also worry about idolizing revolutionary struggles in that, like a no true Scotsman kind of way, because I know, for example, like Cuba in the 50s and 60s was rampantly homophobic. Like deported like 50,000 gay people,
right.
And they're all prisoners and stuff like So just keep your parties in check.
Yeah, no, speaking specifically to the Cuba thing, Leslie Feinberg writes this really interesting thing called like
Lavender and Red.
Lavender and Red. We did a reading in this reading group a couple months ago. It's about like specifically like the LGBTQ history, about like more of the context and like what happened. And I would never deny like the messed up stuff that went down in Cuba, but I also think that like because of the way that that Cuba is and the way that the government is, there was able to be an accountability process for that has never taken place similarly in the US. You know what I mean? There's never been an accountability process for the homophobia of the US government the way that there was. And like no US leader has ever come out and said, oh, I was wrong to do that, and I was wrong to say this, and I need to work to mitigate that harm. Like that just never happens here, but that does happen there. So but I agree that like you can't idealize things. You have to look at things in the face, and it doesn't do anybody any good to deny things or pretend that like everything was peachy. So
well, Archie, before you say, Archie said it better, so I don't want to repeat what Archie said. It's a long discussion, because there's a couple tendencies within the U.S. progressive or left movement. And one of them is under the guise of being hyper, objective. It becomes like, when you were talking about egoism, which I agree with you, it then becomes a certain amount of U.S. chauvinism, egoism, that somehow we're exceptional. And I don't think that, I'm not saying that that's what you meant, but I'm saying it's complicated. And some have also, and that's what makes it complicated. I don't want to stand up here and be an apologist for anything that was wrong in any revolutionary movement. I wouldn't even think to do it. But then it's very hard, because I was watching a video that was done by a guy, I can't even remember his name, about all the incredible amounts of lies that have been told about the people's Korea. I mean, incredible stuff. It's just unbelievable what they've done to brainwash people. So reading that history is important. And then I think within the context of always knowing where we are part of the beast, and how we criticize or think about other socialist countries. But I understand the, how can you put it, sympathy, or what you're trying to say. I mean, we don't want to go around and say something that's not accurate or untrue. But anyhow, Stephen.
Well, I agree, because it was the Bolshevik Party that legalized gay marriage. And see, this is where Workers' World is unique. in the sense that we have an independent view. We don't follow a particular line and say that, and I'm going kind of off track here or whatever, but in the communist movement, there's, the Soviet human tier, and it is true, and we cannot deny the fact that when a certain period, they made gay marriage illegal in the Soviet Union. So, I mean, you can't, have it both ways or whatever. You have to also point out that that was a mistake. And this is one thing that Workers' World, that we believe that Stalin was wrong or made a mistake in the commentary. But there's also a current in the US movement to think that somehow, for example, in Palestine, I see people who, defend Israel and Zionism and, pink washing and claiming that because, Arab society or Middle Eastern culture is quote unquote backwards or isn't progressive on the LGBT, that somehow that it's okay, and regardless of, the fact of whether the Palestinians' land has been stolen, and they use questions like the LGBTQ as a way to attack, oppress people or righteous. You have to keep in mind that Cuba is part of a larger society of Latin America, that machismo is a very much embedded in that culture from Spain, European society. Spain embedded machismo throughout Latin America, and a lot of that had to deal with the cultural, biases that, and Cuba is not exceptional through it, but Argentina, all these different countries, similar things. So to point out Cuba and say Cuba was bad on the LGBT question, well, I don't think, El Salvador or Honduras, Chile, under capitalism was great for LGBT people either. So we have to, be clear on those issues. And 50,000, those facts and figures could be debated because there's pretty sure that's no question or whatever. But when we throw out numbers like that or whatever, it just kind of raises our emotions or whatever. And I don't know what the true facts and figures are or whatever. I don't think it was 50,000, but I won't deny that there weren't persecution.
Rose, you had your hand up, and then Andre, and then we'll let Andre say the last word.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like thinking about the ways in which there's a lot of different large hegemonic truths that, like the warring propagandas throughout the entire 1900s. Like, which one of them is true? I sure as fuck don't want to believe the U.S., but also skeptical of other truths because people that hate gay people are totally going to make up lies.
Yeah.
And speaking on the El Salvador, Honduras, things like that, that ties back to, I'm sorry, I don't remember your name in the red shirt. What's your name?
David.
What you said about all the people killed, supposedly, as you said, in the USSR, it's interesting that we hold communist regimes accountable for that kind of thing without looking at the number of deaths in capitalism, which is basically every unnatural death in capitalism is a capitalist death.
Yeah.
And we only hold it to a communist state's accountability when it's under that regime.
Yeah.
Andre, and then
I was a little leery. Give an example. Back in the 90s, there was a right-wing group that was really like Cuban, and what they were trying to do is stand up and say, "Oh, look at the way that Cuba did gay people." But this right-wing grouping in the United States, when many states and cities were fighting to get an anti-discrimination law passed that prohibited discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, did any of them come to the defense of the LGBTQ community right then? No. Not at all, and they have no intention. So they were, sometimes have to look a little past the statement because they were basically using that for their right-wing purposes to put down the country of Cuba. And they've done nothing to promote equality for the LGBTQ community here in the United States. Right now in Cuba, there are talks, and I love doing comparison things. In Cuba's National Assembly, which is the highest body, there's an organization called Cinesex. Is that the right name, Stephen? And they are in discussion at the National Assembly of Cuba. They have put it before the body, and they're starting discussions on nationwide legalizing same-sex marriage. Compare that here to the United States, where there are still states that won't try not to recognize same-sex marriage, like the woman out in Kentucky that just decided she wasn't going to perform any, and the battle that ensued there, and we ultimately won. So there are still light years away ahead of the United States in where they have evolved from a bad position, whether it was based on machismo or based on the strong leanings of the Catholic Church that ran the country at the time of the Cuban Revolution. And like that evolution has climbed up and is continuing to work toward equality for the LGBTQ people in Cuba. I had a chance to meet people from the LGBT community when I was there in 1991 and also in 2003. And it was very heartwarming to sit and discuss with them and discuss the differences between the two countries. I think that's the end of the comment.
And that's partially the end of the discussion. I get the last word. I thank you all for that. But it's really chair privilege. The basic thing is I wanted to end with a couple points and then announce for people to put this on their calendars. The next class is May 8th, which is, what is that, 2 weeks from now? On Monday, here at 7 o'clock. Larry Holmes will be here, and the topic's going to be the national question. I pass this around. If you
Can you kind of, some people might not know what the national
I
question.
will. I am. Give me a chance.
Okay, sorry.
You haven't let me have a chance, Stephen.
I'm her son, so.
That doesn't. At any rate, okay. But anyhow, it's Monday, the 8th at 7 o'clock here, and Larry Holmes is going to be speaking on, as Stephen says, explain the national question, which is really, it's about, essentially about racism, but it's really about the national oppression of oppressed nationalities, which actually Lenin first wrote about. See, Stephen wants me to give the whole class, and I don't really want to do that, so you got to come and find out. But anyhow, it goes back to the days of Lenin. It goes back to what Karl Marx was one of the first to talk about socialism, but Lenin started to talk about imperialism and about self-determination for peoples who are oppressed, countries that are oppressed by imperialism, and also the internal question of colonies that exist within the U.S. borders. Black and brown people. I could go on, indigenous, Arab, Native. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to just give a quick comment on why I think it's really important to study the national question. It's that you can go to your favorite nonprofit's workshop on racism where you like pay $300 to check your privilege for 2 weeks or whatever. And you can learn a lot about, you can learn about a lot about how racism operates based on, they will never say nationality, right? They'll never, it's about your ethnicity, it's about your U.S. Race category, right? But then without ever addressing the national question, you'll walk away thinking things like, oh, the people fleeing bombings in Syria they're white passing, so they're not oppressed. Right? So the question of oppressor nations versus oppressed nations is like key to understanding racism and key to understanding imperialism.
Material. Always talk about racial identity.
Right.
And it's also key to understanding what is the solution to it too.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's was Lenin's contribution about self-determination for oppressed nationalities. And I think it's a very unique contribution that Workers' World feels. And I'm not pushing Workers' World alone because I'm going to end with something else, a different point totally. But it's key because, you know, if you don't fight for that, you can't achieve unity. So why we hold the issue of national oppression and what to do about it is important. You can't tell people, and it's more said it very, very well. It's more than just a question of racism or discrimination or ideas. It's about class relations. If a country is oppressed or a people is oppressed, they don't have the power to determine their own destiny. And that's really what Larry's going to talk about. So I'm not really going to say more about that because that really will lengthen this whole thing. I wanted to end with just two things. Discussion and people's input was unbelievable tonight and very good. I hope people came away and learned a little bit, even if they don't know everything. There is another we're like running, we're not behind, we're right on time to end. There are some other things that people can read on their own. I mean, we can have classes and stuff, but I wanted to remind people to circle the 3 things that so that we can determine after Larry, and I think we're doing it. And then I just want to end with this one thing because I thought that what struck me in this whole discussion that impressed me was people's understanding of individualism and capitalism and the fallacy of that concept. And I'm kind of repeating what I said at the conference. But I think the worst possible thing in this world is to be an individual because capitalism teaches us, and that's the egoism that Rose was referring to it. Fidel talks about it as being vanity. I think that might be a more scientific term, but you know, we get nowhere with individualism. You can be a great person, and maybe you learn more than somebody, and maybe you'll be a great speaker, and maybe you'll go out there and you know the press will recognize you, but you will end up never being able to accomplish anything without a real actual organization, without a real building, a real movement. So, and this is where David will think I'm going astray. But it doesn't matter if you want to join some other organization, join it. So we are friends. But we do hope that you join Workers' World Party because we need people's energy. We need people's contributions. Everyone's got skills and talents that are different. You know, some of us can stand up and talk for hours. Some of us like to draw. Some of us do films. And you don't even know how incredibly deep it might be. And they might be standing see the world and how they function. Somebody else maybe, I don't know, the dogs can do shit. Anyhow, because we get a dog caucus.
We have a dog
But
caucus,
hopefully you get involved. And even if you don't feel like you're ready to, you know, take that next step into joining an actual party because of whatever, the discipline or whatever you think it is, which I do want to say, you don't have to eat, you know, we do have fun. And people do go to bed and sleep, and people do all the other normal human things and go out and see the woods and the trees and do the parties and, you know, go have beer. We do all that shit. Everybody does different stuff. It might be different strokes for different folks, but we're human beings. So we do know that people need rest and relaxation. They need all sorts of stuff. And we do have each other's backs. We do, you know, so I'm saying that because if anyone needs a ride home tonight, we will get you home. I mean, it's hard in the beginning when we're starting the meetings up. So if you get here on your own, that's cool. But if you didn't come with a car or you didn't come, if you came by public transportation, see me after the meeting and make sure and sign up for that. And we don't believe that socialism is a panacea, but we definitely believe that capitalism is hell. And we've got to destroy it.
Everybody needs a ride home. I'm free.
Yeah, me too.
Cool.